Well, as ride-sharing services eclipse yellow taxis in New York City, cab drivers have really fallen on hard times. 5 have even taken their own lives in recent months. Some were paying off debt from buying taxi medallions that cost up to $700,000. But increased competition from Uber and Lyft have also hurt their ability to make money. For more now, we turn to Allison Griswold. She's a sharing economy reporter for Quartz, and also joining us, Harry Campbell, author of The Rideshare Guide, everything you need to know about driving from Uber, Lyft, and other ride-sharing companies. He joins us from Los Angeles. Harry, I want to start with you. Give us a sense sort of the financial toll that these ride-sharing companies have put on these cab drivers.
Well, I mean, I think that there's no doubt that, for a long time, there were about 13,000 taxis in New York City. And in the past few years, we've seen a huge influx of Uber and Lyft drivers. I think it's now reported that there's over almost 60,000 Uber drivers on the road in New York City. So as you can imagine, Uber has definitely grown some of the pie and grown some of that market share, but it's no doubt cut into a lot of the existing taxi business. So while there are more options now for consumers, I think what we're starting to see is that taxi drivers are not making nearly as enough. And even on the Uber driving side, some of these Uber drivers are now seeing that without any type of real regulation, Uber drivers are starting to hurt financially too. So it's not just taxis. I think this is really more of a driver problem than anything.
Allison, I want to ask you about Douglas Shifter. He was a cab driver who recently took his own life. He posted a message on Facebook, and in that message, he really blamed politicians for not looking out for the little guy. Is that a fair criticism?
It's a difficult question. I think a lot of drivers feel animosity toward the city because they feel like they had this contract where the value of the taxi medallion appreciated. And so a lot of drivers who had sunk their life savings into that felt like that was their key to a retirement.
Give us a sense, Allison, of this medallion system, because I think a lot of people outside of New York might not understand. You might think, well, why don't you just move on to Uber? Why is that so hard for these taxi drivers?
Sure. So for years, the New York City government regulated heavily what amount of drivers could be in the city, and the way they did this was through what we call the taxi medallion. So they would allow a certain number of medallions to be in circulation, which basically caps the supply. And when you cap the supply, that means that the demand is going to basically always exceed the supply in a city like New York.
Yeah.
And that's why those medallions were worth over $1 million before Uber came in.
Before Uber came in, and some of these folks paid that money or are trying to pay off the debt for that medallion. Harry, I want to ask you, has Uber in any way responded to this, the rise in deaths here, and do they feel that there's a pressure as you innovate to look at the human capital as well, or is that just not their problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the areas that I've been disappointed in Uber's response, is that they sort of look at this as they can do no wrong in this type of situation. And as Allison mentioned, I think there's a lot of blame actually to go around. I mean, of course, these medallion owners, it's not just drivers, it's also cab owners that are owning lots of cars on the road. And, that's a lot different than the driver who's going and investing their life savings in a medallion. I think at the same time, the cities who are making millions, if not billions of dollars in revenue off of these taxi medallions. And then, of course, Uber. They came in and did provide a lot of great transportation options for riders and even work opportunities for drivers. But now with the fact that they're basically unchecked, I think we're seeing, too much of a good thing can definitely be a bad thing. We're seeing some of those repercussions right now.
Allison, Uber kind of brands itself as you can be your own boss, but there's a lot more that goes to this. I mean, there's an algorithm with the cars that get picked up, the people you get picked up. There's also a pay structure. So where does that leave folks who use Uber, who actually are driving with Uber?
Uber considers its drivers to be independent contractors, which is important because it means that they don't get any benefits and they have to pay their expenses out of pocket. And Uber's had a number of legal battles over this. And it's like you say, it's somewhere in the middle. They are their own boss in the sense that a driver can choose when they want to work. They can sign on and off the app as they choose. But there's always an algorithm in control. So it's the algorithm that decides how much you're going to make for each fare. It might tell you there's a special promo you can chase. And so at the end of the day, you're sort of following that.
Harry, are there other industries that you think could be disrupted by ride-sharing services?
I think that definitely right now, rideshare is obviously having a big impact on the taxis, but I think for the most part, its scope is kind of going to be limited to taxis and rideshare. I mean, at the end of the day, I think this is really, like I said, more of a driver issue than anything.
And Allison, you've done some reporting on sort of the disruption potentially coming to future of car rental. What's that about?
It's very interesting. So we think of the taxi industry as the one that's been decimated by Uber, but actually you're starting to see these side effects where people are taking Uber for what they might have traditionally taken a rental car for. So a great example is when Enterprise got started and became really popular in the 90s. They saw themselves as sort of this stopgap measure for a family who maybe had to take their car into the shop. And nowadays, a lot of those people might not think to get a rental car. They're just going to take Uber in the interim. So the rental car companies are starting to really hurt because of that.
All right. Allison Griswold, fascinating reporting. Thank you for joining us, as well as you, Harry Campbell from Los Angeles. Thank you both for bringing us this important story.